One of my favorite pieces of military hardware would be aircraft carriers. However, they're extremely expensive to build, operate, and maintain. Today, I'll be reacting to a Business Insider video looking at why the US Navy's state-of-the-art 4-class carrier is as expensive as it is.
These 40,000-pound underwater bombs are just another test before the US Navy's largest and most expensive aircraft carrier is declared combat ready. The USS
Pretty expensive tests by the looks of it.
Gerald R. Ford is the first in a new class of carriers with more firepower and a smaller crew.
I guess it'll be replacing the Nimitz class.
The previous class began service in 1975. The Ford was designed to save.
Okay, despite 1975 being 46 years ago, it's not that old when it comes to military hardware because testing is takes about 10 years to complete testing. And manufacturing takes a couple of decades at least, so yeah, it's not as old as you think.
Billions over a 50-year lifespan. Still, the Ford was double the cost of the last carrier built, and it's been plagued with unexpected costs and delays.
Okay, so the F-35 of aircraft carriers.
Just unclogging the toilets can cost $400,000.
Okay, that's some scary shit right there.
We went aboard the USS Ford to find out why America's most advanced aircraft carrier still can't be deployed nearly 2 decades after plans to build it began.
I think they could just stick to the Nimitz class. Maybe I'm talking out my ass here, but the Nimitz is still the most sophisticated type of aircraft carrier. Not talking about the Ford class, as in this one, but if you remove that from the equation, the Nimitz class is still the most sophisticated aircraft carrier. The Brits haven't been able to replicate, the Chinese haven't been able to replicate, and let's not start about the Russians. Their naval capability is quite minimal compared to the rest of the world, so yeah.
These sailors are moving ordnance onto a new kind of weapons elevator that allows them to do what would be impossible on any other aircraft carrier.
We're bypassing the mess deck area. We're completely independent. You would never even see us moving ordnance throughout the day. So it's more secure with higher survivability, and we can store more on board.
Yeah, it's more efficient as well.
It's the only way to move munitions from deep inside the Ford to rearm planes on its flight deck. Less advanced carriers move weapons in a more dangerous way, through the hangars to the flight deck.
Yeah, given that, an aircraft carrier, as in any ship, isn't a stationary object, it sounds like more work than, it's actually more work than actually sounds.
There are 11 elevators on board, yet only 7 are fully functioning. Until all 11 elevators are complete, this ship can't be certified for deployment. The advanced weapons elevators are just one example of nearly 24 major new technologies that make the USS Ford cutting edge and one big floating experiment. Tal Manville is a retired Navy captain who served as the very first project manager on this new class of aircraft carrier.
The ship was supposed to start construction in 2004. It got moved to 2005. They made an
So, a 15-year delay.
adjustment. They delayed it a second time. They delayed it a third time. Pushing that out, the ship, just by those delays, went from $6.4 billion to $10 billion.
Okay, for those who are unaware, the more you push a project, the longer as in, let's say, a hardware-based project like this one, the more money you have to spend in maintaining whatever you've built so far. So that's why it's increased.
Ford is the first of 4 new carriers already in different stages of design and build. The Navy plans to replace the entire supercarrier fleet with Fords. U.S. law requires its Navy to operate 11 carriers at all times, but with all
I didn't know that. I just thought that they selected 11 carriers, as in 10 for all of their overseas deployed, all the major fleets, and 1 for standby.
the delays, the U.S. is down to 10.
The reason we have 11 is driven by the fact that the U.S. Navy is kind of a two-ocean Navy, if you will.
Of the 22 aircraft carriers in the world, half are American, while China, Italy, and the UK have just 2 each.
This carrier class.
Okay, despite everything, and people keep saying that China's going to take the United States soon, there's Russia and all that, but despite all that, there's no there's no questioning the fact that the Americans are still the dominant military power and will be the dominant military power in the foreseeable future. Regardless of your political stance or your takes on U.S. foreign policy, this is a fact.
If we build 10 or 11 or 12, could go easily into the 22nd century.
Okay, yes. Another thing is when Americans say aircraft carriers, they're talking only about super aircraft carriers. Those are the massive ones they show in the movies and stuff like that. They have smaller amphibious assault carriers, just similar to some of India's earlier aircraft carriers. And if you're going to go by international standards, I'd say the Americans have about 20-something aircraft carriers currently deployed. But they don't consider the smaller ones aircraft carriers. They consider them amphibious assault carriers or something like that. So, yeah. Potatoes, I guess.
5,000 shipbuilders worked an estimated 49 million hours to build the Ford. That's 7 times the hours logged building the Empire State Building. Admiral Mike Gilday, the chief of naval operations, said it was a mistake to introduce more than maybe 1 or 2 technologies on any complex platform at a time.
No shit, Sherlock.
Admiral Gilday is right. What you want to do is only do 1 or 2 new technologies on a new ship. And here's the reason why.
The thing is, you gradually increase. Okay. I'm not talking about military technology. I'm just talking about any project. You gradually increase the complexity. You just don't go from 0 to 100. Go from 0 to a 10 to a 20, a 20 to a 40, and so on.
Ships are the only weapon that the prototype, the first of the class, goes to war on.
The ship was christened in 2013. The Navy accepted delivery of the ship in 2017 without everything working as a way to stay under that year's budget requirements. 4 years later, the carrier's systems and technology are still being tested, and it won't be ready for deployment until 2022.
Yeah, that's like a year from now. And given military standards, I guess they're on schedule.
So it can go to sea, pilots can take off and land, but the problems are still being ironed out before it's ready to go to war.
It's pretty clear that putting this many new technologies onto one ship was a mistake from a program management perspective, because it did cause the program to be delayed.
The delays and tests and fixes are so costly that every new piece of technology is over budget. 2 of the technologies that set the Ford apart from every other carrier.
Okay, the thing about delays and all that is, the thing is, people who are outside the industry, when I'm talking about industry, I'm not talking about the military industrial complex, I'm talking more or less talking about people in product management. You know that delays are inevitable. You know that there's going to be a couple of screw-ups, which is going to end up with the project being overpriced. So I'm just saying that they're honoring the tradition of fucking things up when it comes to projects.
Here are the aircraft takeoff and landing systems.
Some of those are very large, not incremental changes, but I would say revolutionary changes in terms of the electromagnetic aircraft launch system.
Other carriers use steam-driven catapults to propel their jets off the deck.
Okay, this technology actually makes it more energy efficient, but I'll just leave it at that.
But the Ford uses electromagnetic linear
And when I said the more efficient one is the electromagnetic one, not the steam-powered one.
induction motors, similar to a high-speed maglev train or roller coaster. Just research and design on the electromagnetic aircraft launch system cost over $1 billion.
Okay, another thing about military technology is most of the money goes into R&D, not manufacturing. R&D. Why do you think the Russian jets, the older Soviet-era Russian jets, and the F-16 are cheaper? It's because of economics of scale. They would have been expensive when they were initially released. So, if you wait for 50 years, the F-35 would be, 3/4 its price.
Installing it on the USS Ford cost more than twice what it was supposed to.
The steam catapult system had thousands of moving parts. There are less than 100 moving parts.
Okay, this is one thing they always mention in any engineering class you take. Regardless of it being, let's say, electronics, mechanical, or even fucking civil engineering. They make it a point to state that, they make it a point that you understand that the more complex piece of equipment is, the higher probability that, it might fail, it's hard to replace, and so on. So they try to make it a point to reduce the number of parts in any system. I guess that, these steam-based catapult systems would have been their most minimal form. However, that itself is quite complicated by the looks of things.
On a electromagnetic catapult. So that was a big improvement.
Fewer moving parts means fewer sailors to operate and maintain.
Okay, yeah, that's even better.
The smaller crew and new technologies were projected to save $4 billion over its 50-year run.
Okay, not just from a cash perspective, but from an operational perspective. It's easier to pass along a chain of command. It's easier to command a smaller crew than a larger crew. You do know how complicated your chain of command becomes if it's a larger crew.
Compared to the previous class of aircraft carriers. The new system causes less stress on the planes, so they last longer, and more types of aircraft can use it, including ones that are still being designed. Landing and takeoff are easier on pilots too, since a computer does the work.
The pilot turns over control to the computer. It autopilots the airplane down to the carrier deck, and then when it hits that advanced arresting gear, it just smoothly brings it to a stop. So
That's extremely impressive, given that aircraft carrier landings are one of the toughest type of landings that pilots face.
Dramatically different experience for the pilot. It's much safer, and then it's also going to make the airplane last longer.
The Ford's computerized systems allow both lighter and heavier planes to take off and land, something that limited older carriers. The Ford's combination of new technologies means that a wider variety of aircraft can land on it.
It's smoother arrestments for aircraft. That is our goal here on board for future of naval aviation, flying drones and F-35s.
Oddly enough, the new launch system can't handle the newest fighter plane, so
That's ironic.
Ford will need a retrofit to handle the F-35 stealth fighter. The next Ford-class carrier is under construction in the shipyard, but it's already being modified for the F-35 at an added cost of $315 million.
Ah yes, just like standard projects. Anywhere you go, it's the same thing.
Many of the Ford's delays can be traced back to politics. 5 American presidents over 2 decades weighed in on the planning and building of the Ford.
The Department of Defense made the aircraft carrier program far more expensive than it needed to be. And you can take that to the bank.
So far,
Ah yes, taxpayer money being spent on politics.
the true cost of building this warhorse is $13.3 billion,
Still cheaper than Afghanistan.
a number that's increased nearly every year since construction began. Even the most basic of onboard functions can be eye-wateringly expensive. The ship has 750 toilets connected through vacuum pressure, like the system on
And that's another reason you want a smaller crew.
commercial jets. When one toilet gets clogged, the whole system can be affected. The
That's like the worst nightmare situation possible.
fix requires an acid flush that costs $400,000, and the Navy has said it doesn't know how often it will need to be done. The Navy changed its shipbuilding programs when the Ford's problems came up. It began designing and testing the takeoff systems on land in 2011, while the Ford was under construction. The advanced weapons elevators are also now being tested before installation. However, that program will only benefit the next Ford-class carrier.
And please it'll benefit the next generation of world-class aircraft carriers. Americans are like, anyway, when it comes to new stuff, the first project's always a mess up, more or less. The later on installments, you learn, you adapt, and so on. So it's good. From a certain perspective, it's actually good that they've learned.
Built as a deterrent, the true value of the Ford is likely to be in the wars it helps prevent, rather than those it wages.
Isn't that the whole point of modern militaries? It's to deter a war than actually fight a war, because you don't want your citizens dying in some faraway country, or at home for that matter. If you enjoyed this video, how about giving me a like? Also, I'll really appreciate it if you subscribed. Thank you and have a nice day.